The leader said something to me like, you have integrity. That's really rare in this profession. And a couple months later, I was gone. Because that was it. They said the quiet part out loud, basically. And that was enough signal to lead. And it was the best decision, career-wise that I've made.
This is Executives Unplugged, raw and honest conversations with CEOs and senior leaders about how to lead through change. I'm Keith Cowing, your host and executive coach. My guest today is Natasha Jaffe. Natasha is an experienced engineering leader and now a coach for other engineers and engineering leads. And she has led teams at large public companies, as well as startups all the way from early days through multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. In this conversation, we explore how to make decisions for ourselves using our moral compass and independent thinking, and how to make changes to our teams or our companies while still considering the team on the ground and making sure that you don't go looking for productivity gains and accidentally squash the magic in the process. Let's jump in. Natasha, welcome.
Hi, Keith. Thank you for having me.
Awesome to have you here. Let's jump right into a really core topic for engineers, which is flow state. And you've been an engineer, you've led engineering teams at startups, at Fortune 100 companies, everything in between. Now you coach engineers, and it seems like this is a topic that's really important and maybe sometimes leadership forgets about, especially during times of rapid change. So what does it look like to be in flow as an engineer?
Flow is being in the zone, with your work, whatever that work may be, or a hobby or whatever, right? You sit down, you put your head up, and it's been 3 hours and you had no idea because you were just so into what you were doing. And so for most of the engineers that I know, like, it's a really enjoyable and stimulating thing. And that is when, their most creative and their most deep work comes out.
What kind of leadership decisions can enable engineers to be in flow more of the time, and what kinds of decisions can get in the way of it?
Yeah, some obvious ones that most people are probably familiar with, just protecting your people's time. Engineers need long, uninterrupted blocks of heads down time. So not lots of meetings. Some people, other functions, like they need meetings. That's basically what their work is. Engineers, no, they need that quiet heads down time. So that's a big one, protecting your engineers' time. Another one is being very careful about pushing a particular focus on your teams. It's easy to say we have this product roadmap, and you are not going to work on anything else that is not directly tied to the product roadmap and doesn't move the needle on the product roadmap. And over time, if you do this for long enough, your engineers are going to lose their flow because they're going to be prioritizing important over interesting. Flow happens when it aligns with an engineer's natural curiosity. You don't want to lose out on that. You will see the negative impact over time.
The story in the market is, well, you can do more with less people now, so you should be. On the ground level, people doing the work are thinking about their jobs and are afraid of that. And then at the CEO level, they're afraid about the future of the company and how do I pivot according to that. Would love to dig in a little bit about how leaders can make sure that we're making the rapid changes that maybe need to happen, but at the same point, realizing that there's humans that have to bring you along for the ride. And you have to bring those humans along for the ride, and you can't just crush all the flow state, or you're never going to get that magic that you had.
What I'm seeing in some of the conversations that I have when it does come up, it's a lot of trepidation. At best, I'll see sort of a neutral reception. But in other conversations, I've heard the term like dystopian. I've heard a lot of resistance, this feeling that, they're losing something special actually by being pushed to use AI and having their tools dictated to them by senior leadership, someone who might not even be writing code themselves and hasn't been for quite some time. Just quickly, one other theme that, you remind me of here that's not specifically related to flow, but is related to risk and productive risk taking. I think that's part of what we're talking about here, right? Like if it's time to innovate, that means productive risk taking. When your people are afraid, they're not going to be taking those risks. And so I think that's something I would like leaders to keep in mind as well.
And you, in your leadership and in your coaching, you think about empathy a lot. You think about listening to people and deeply listening, really paying attention to what's working for them, what's not working for them. What are you seeing in how people can navigate these crazy changes that need to happen, but doing so while listening to the team? And it could be a recent example, it could be an old example of a big change that a team went through and how you listen to people or how you saw an engineering leader listen to people. How can we listen to people and still make the changes we need to make?
One of those sort of classic sources of change is reorgs. People just got used to their team the way it was, and then the team was split in half and then recombined, with half of another team. And maybe their product mandate was changed, and all of a sudden they have no idea, what are they working on? Like, what is the value they drive? How can they demonstrate that value? And more often than not, it makes them disengaged and demoralized. You can end up with like all this negativity on the team, and it's not good. And so, as a manager, at least, where you start is the one-on-ones, and you listen and you pick up on the themes. And you try to figure out like, no, what is it that they're actually concerned about? What's important to them? Like, what are they worried they're about to miss or lose? And then you speak to those things. You can't always tell them, hey, the thing you're worried about is not actually a concern. You're fine. It's more like, I hear what you're saying. This is how we're mitigating that risk for you, for example. Or this is what you can do to make that scary outcome less likely. So at the end of the day, it is about empowering and giving them the right information, making sure they know they're not alone, and also getting buy-in, and the alignment. So in one of my last roles as an engineering leader, I took on a small organization that was very much in flux. They had been through a reorg and had just been through another reorg like a few months later, and they'd lost a couple managers, and it was a mess. And I was looking at what we had, and I realized, look, we have 3 teams right now, but it makes no sense because we lost like half our people. That means like 1 IC and 1 manager, and then the second team is like 2 ICs and 1 manager. And we're going to have to condense here. We're going to have to go from 3 to 2. And there's a lot of apprehension about that. And so how I went about it and what I think worked well is that I brought everyone into the decision-making process. And I structured the exercise. We thought about what are the themes between our teams? What makes most organic sense for our structuring? And then little things too, like choosing a team name and a team mascot. Like that feels very kind of like Band-Aid-y, but it still helps. And if nothing else, it gets people, to loosen up a little bit and to get into their creative thinking. So the big ones, I guess, are making the hard decision, despite the fear, bringing people into how they actually get there. So they feel like I was part of this. Maybe they didn't take my suggestion, but I was part of the discussion and they listened to the risks I brought up, and then they mitigated the risks that I brought up. And then also like the creative play piece. Play is so important, especially when we're going through stressful things.
And when you think about burnout and you think about big changes and you think about pushes to move faster, and right now there's a big push of we better move faster, we better move faster, we better move faster.
Yeah.
What do you think right now, given the tools that are out there, where teams are, the changes in the air, what are you seeing actually helps engineering teams move faster on the ground in reality?
The toil and the process. And so that's why I'd encourage leaders to look to in general, especially if they're thinking to themselves, oh, I want people to use AI to do XYZ. No, like say, actually, how can we use AI and other tools to reduce toil? Like if you think about it, like say you have a funnel, right? And you're trying to get more things through the funnel. And so you could just push really hard at the top of the funnel, and you can tell your engineers run harder, at the goal, or you can widen the mouth at the bottom, right? And so you do that by removing friction, you do that by reducing toil, you re-examine processes that don't need to be there.
I'd love to hear your take on something I'm seeing and feeling in the market, which is we went through an era of generalists in the 90s. You'd have a bunch of engineers, you'd have a team lead. They may not have even had a specific title. It was just the person that was the manager, is the boss. And then the people doing the work and everybody was hands-on. And I think full stack was just assumed.
Right.
If you
Yeah.
just did whatever you had to do. And then we got into specialties where we had front-end engineers and back-end engineers and product managers and designers and data scientists. And they all had their functional,
SREs. Yeah.
exactly. And they all had their functional realms, and one at a time we'd grow a new one. And product managers became experts in only growth products for B to B to C. And it seems like maybe it got a little out of hand. And now it's, I wouldn't say rotating back to generalists, but I see a focus, particularly I'm biased towards the early stage, but in small companies, having multiple specialties where people are wearing multiple hats. And maybe in the past they couldn't because you couldn't do two jobs anyway. So it didn't really matter if you had multiple skill sets because you had to choose one. And it may have been fun, but unless you're the CEO and the founder, you really didn't have that bandwidth. And now I see people that are filling in, and maybe there's one PM that's also doing some design work, or an engineer that's also doing PM work, or a data scientist and an engineer sort of really acting as one, with AI helping with some of the trivial work so that they can do the meat on each side.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say toil, I am fearful of that collapsing of the talent stack, meaning that there's just less roles in some situations. But on the flip side, I think you can move lightning speed because if you have one person doing multiple jobs, there's one less negotiation point. And a lot of toil, in my experience, is driven by like everybody trying to get on the same page. And when there's just less people to get on the same page, you can move so much faster. And there's a tension
Yeah.
there because you want intellectual debate to make the process better.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, there's that turns on its head real quick and just turns into getting gummed up. And so, how do you
Yeah.
think about specialties and moving fast and sort of more voices in the room versus fewer voices in the room?
Yeah. No, these are great questions too. First, though, just to point out the toil reduction piece, it's interesting. I actually don't see the toil reduction piece, at least within software engineering, eliminating roles per se, so much as allowing those same people to move faster. So just that sort of one thing to point out there, but that might not be true in other roles or in other functions. When it comes to three people now becoming one, yeah, that's really interesting. And so the like just split tracking here, like the fear that you're pointing out, the risk that you're pointing out rather, is everything we lose by not having sort of the group mind there to help test ideas more thoroughly. One answer is potentially AI, right? Like more AI. Use your AI as a thought partner. Make them poke holes in what you're doing. And we were just talking before this, right? Like some AI chatbots are better at that than others, right? I don't know, but I do think that the answer has to be you do need somehow to retain rather that human connection. You should be having conversations with another human about your ideas, no matter what.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I would say, I think going from one person to two is an
Mm.
exponential growth in the quality of the thought and the
Yeah,
decision making. Then
yeah.
going from two to three is probably incremental growth. And then when you get to
Hmm.
eight, you've squashed it.
It's too much. Like
And
you've fallen off the other side of the fitness curve. Yeah,
right. And there is a bell curve, I think, where the
yeah,
x axis is the number of people involved and the y axis is like the quality and velocity. And it sort of peaks.
right.
And then it
Yeah.
just
And
degrades
it's
really rapidly.
asymmetric, right? Like you kind of go like this and then
It
poof, you
just
fall off the
falls off.
curve.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I, I am actually optimistic in some situations that instead of having eight seats at the table, maybe it's three. I don't think it's
Yeah.
one. I don't like one, but having two, having three,
That's
then
great. Yeah.
all of a sudden you can get aligned really quickly. And even if quality is less,
Yeah.
even if the decision making accuracy is less, if the
Yeah.
speed is twice as fast, then maybe moving twice as fast because of decision making not getting gummed up and causing its own version of toil,
Yeah.
that's actually a better model long term.
That reminds me of, a lot of the trade-offs between small teams versus big teams, right? So there's not just what we were just talking about, which is, the decision making when you have too many cooks in the kitchen. There's also just focus. If your team does Scrum, for example, stand up on an 8-person team is a misery,
Hmm.
but no one gets much of any value of it in any way. But a 3-person stand up, that's great. And you also don't have to do it every day. You do it twice a week, and that's terrific. And you have like sort of these focused, project, syncs.
You spend a lot of time talking to people about where they want to go in their career, what they want to do, where they get their flow state, where they get their joy, where they're productive and successful. I would love to hear a little bit about advice you're giving people today on how to follow their moral compass and how to engage in an environment where no matter what, everybody's going to have uncertainty in the air. But you
Yeah,
can have uncertainty in the air just because we don't all know the future and still have an environment that is honest and open and really productive and has other things like
yeah,
clarity and support and psychological safety and appropriate risk taking. And so How are
Yeah.
you talking to people right now about navigating the career landscape of where do they want to be?
Yeah, sure. Like, so for what it's worth, like the moral compass thing, it's more of an internal reflection. And it also feels a little odd or maybe that much more timely to talk about it right now when so many people are impacted by layoffs and they have to make, very practical decisions with respect to their employment, right? But, the thing that's been on my mind is don't leave your moral compass at home. No matter where you are, if you're actively searching for a job, if you're in your role, and you find yourself in a place where you've been told to do something, right? Told to pick up some task, implement something in some way, cut a corner, and your moral compass is making noise, listen to it. So, in my own career, I think all the biggest regrets I've had have come to not listening to my moral compass or not doing it enough. And the times where it's paid off the most, the decisions that I make are when they are in line with my moral compass. So if you want to talk about specifics, you can, but it's just the general advice like, don't discount it. Money is important, yes. Status, you know what? That is important. These things are important. You might be more important for one person than for another, but don't discount the moral compass.
I think that's really powerful. What are some of the things in your experience that have put that at risk in your decision making or caused you to accidentally sway into a direction that later on you realized you needed to change?
Yeah, I've had times in my career many years ago where I was offered a role that I felt rightfully belonged to another person. And the leader trying to get me to take the role pushed it pretty hard. And at the end of the day, I refused, knowing that they wouldn't give the other person the role. And I remember it stuck in my head so much. The leader said something to me like, "You have integrity. That's really rare in this industry, in this profession." And a couple months later, I was gone. That was, that was it. That was, they said the quiet part out loud, basically. And that was enough signal to lead. And it was the best decision, career-wise that I've made. You
And how do you
know,
uncover that going in? You're digging down deep to say, hey, from a principles perspective, and I think this is true in all relationships. If you have the same values, then a lot of the other stuff you can figure out. Different personalities, different styles, different approaches, different skills, different
yeah,
passions. But values are really important, and integrity is a value. That's a core
yeah,
principle as a human. And
yeah.
so, how do you test for those principles and values where, on the surface, frankly, people are very likely to lie to you when you're interviewing?
With the interviews, like that's hard to uncover, right? But when it comes to actually working within a role, the signals are tend to be clear. The big one, of course, is like your gut. You're gonna. I know about you. I feel a little sick. When my moral compass is trying to tell me something, I feel it. But the other thing to be aware of is, how much time am I spending on rationalizing things, on mental gymnastics, especially if you're a leader and you have to turn around and explain to your team like, oh no, no, this is good. This is actually really great for the client, that sort of thing, or it's great for you. You feel that, right? Maybe you have to focus a little more, but that's a signal like how much time am I spending on these kinds of activities?
Or if you're defending decisions that you don't
Defending
fundamentally
decisions,
believe in.
right, that do not align with your core. And if you realize, oh, it's really hard for me to do that, there's a reason. There's a reason that's hard.
If somebody out there is trying to figure out whether or not the fundamental values and principles are aligned, what
Mm.
questions would you be asking to help them go through that self-discovery process?
So what's bothering you? What about this is setting off your alarm bells? So I'd ask that to help dig into it, to pressure test it a little bit. It could be that there's some discomfort that's being caused by something else, right? But more importantly, like honestly, to get clarity, like what is the thing? What is the problem? And then sort of the next set of questions, would focus on, well, is this something that you can change? Can you change this in place? I think that should always be the first option. Like try to make it better, wherever you are. Try to affect that change if you can. Unfortunately, oftentimes the answer is no. We like to think like every person is empowered. I remember at like a previous employer, like there's an auditorium, there are like thousands of us there. And the leader of that part of the organization held up a penny. He's like, "This is your magic wand. If you see something, you write to me." And I remember thinking, like sitting in the back, just being like, "Yeah, right." But that all that being said, like first, what can I do where I am? What can I do to make it better? What needs to be true in order for me to be brave? What needs to be true? What is the worst thing that could happen if I was brave and it didn't work out? Like, what is the worst thing that can happen? How can I prepare for that? But then also, like, can I work here and still follow my moral compass? That's important too. And if the answer is no, start thinking about that, start exploring that. That's a luxury, by the way, in this job market, as far as I'm concerned. But it doesn't mean that you don't have the thoughts and you don't develop those thoughts.
You can have two ideas at the same time. One is where you
Right.
stand from a values and principles perspective, and the other one is what's the reality in the market today.
How do I get
And
through? How do I continue to support my family?
right.
Yeah,
You need to make the decisions that are right for you, which don't only involve that, but when you can make a decision based on that, you do. And then other times, and this is one of the reasons why we work so hard so that we can buy ourselves literally the opportunity to be able to make those decisions more and more on our own
choice.
in the future. That,
Yeah,
that makes that schlepping worth it. And
totally.
I love the simplicity of the questions that you are asking
Well,
of
thanks.
what is bothering you. I am amazed sometimes by the questions that sound simple and obvious are the most revealing frequently. A lot
Mm,
of times I'm simply asking somebody, well, hold on. There's all this stuff going on, all these stakeholders, all these people in your ear. What do you want?
mm,
And more often than not, people are not nearly as clear. You use the word clarity.
mm.
Clarity is not as sharp as they think it is when they have a moment to sit and reflect. And we don't have a lot of moments. You're in the
Yeah,
whirlwind every day and all this stuff going on. And so I love that simple coaching of just really basic questions, but they get the heart of, okay, where's your moral compass going to take you now? And what's the reality in the world? And now what do we do about it? And at least you're clear about everything. And you don't want to make decisions by accident, by not being
yeah.
clear.
Or have them made for you.
Exactly. Right. And it's amazing how much pressure we get from society, from our friends, from families, from et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, what do you want? Moral compasses are an independent individual thing.
Yeah.
What are you excited about these days?
I love watching what's going on with biotech and drug discovery. I've been following that a lot. AI and drug development, which is a bottleneck right now. I think that's a fascinating space to watch. I love writing. I've been really enjoying that. I have a little blog. Anyone who doesn't know, like, I'm a stay-at-home mom right now. I've been on hiatus for like a year and a half, and it was after like massive burnout from software engineering that never quite got resolved. And so I took a break from software engineering for like a year. I did nothing. I tried to write code and I couldn't. Like my brain just did not want to do it. And then finally, like several months ago, like it turned into my hobby. And writing about software engineering turned into my hobby. So I've been enjoying my hobbies. But no, the rest of the time I love being with my kids. I have a little toddler. He's really fun. I get to have my 6-year-old when he comes off the bus. It's awesome.
What clarity did that break bring to you?
I think the clarity that I had been very, very, very burnt out and that I needed the recovery. And then, let's call it last August or last September, experiencing creativity again for the first time in what must have been multiple years at that point. And in
Wow.
retrospect, low, coming back to sort of our original topic and just the clarity of like, oh, that's what that is. That's what that feels like and what I've been missing. This is really great. I need more of this. So the clarity that I need creativity. I need to do creative things. It's a thing that I need in order to sustain myself week to week.
And where can people find your writing?
They can find my writing at natashajaffe.substack.com. It's called Nuts and Bolts.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your questions, your views. I think it's incredibly important for people to have that moral compass, for people to think about listening to their team and having empathy as we all go through these changes. And if we keep this kind of stuff in mind, I think we can be really successful in navigating that change and do it as humans. So, Natasha, incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for joining me.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
I took three main things out of that conversation with Natasha. The first one is just to take a moment and reflect. Her notes about clarity and really figuring out what you want to do are powerful. The second one was about the moral compass. I love how she pointed out, don't leave your moral compass at home. And for me, I would expand that even more to say, don't leave your independent thinking at home. And then the final piece is listen to your people. Don't go making changes to your company and get rid of 20% of the people on a team, hoping that AI AI can enable you to have the same output or more with less people, and then blow it up so that you get rid of 20% of the people, but 80% of the productivity because you squashed the flow state that your people that are creating the great stuff that you sell have to experience in order to have great products. If we can think for ourselves, lead with our moral compass, and then listen to our people on the team so that even when we make hard changes and fast changes, we put in the work to do it right, then we can be successful. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and this episode. If you did, please leave us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps the show and it helps other people find the content and benefit from it. Until next time, enjoy the ride.